Okay.
So, Ivor, do you know what really disconnects my Wi-Fi?
What?
When you're afraid of something happening and it keeps you back from doing the exact thing, and that just leads to failure in itself. Like this past week, I finally like defended my master's thesis and it went so well. And looking back at this whole past year of like stress and anxiety and like fear that it wasn't going to be good and I was going to disappoint my professor or my parents or myself, it just made it feel very like meaningless and empty. Like, why was I so afraid for so long that I was going to fail that I just ended up not doing this thing? And that is the exact thing that led me to this position. Like, it's just very frustrating.
You know what? I can identify with that so much because I think everyone can. Like, you have that. There's something, whether it be doing a job or presentation or a job interview,
Yeah.
or I don't know, asking someone out or just talking to them. There's this massive buildup of like failure or fear of something. And then when you do it, you go, oh,
That wasn't so bad.
look at this. I'm breathing. I'm still
I'm
alive.
still here. I'm still thriving. Like, oh, it actually went really well. And like, now I'm even better for having tried and done the thing.
So on that note, a big shout out to you for completing your
Thank
thesis.
you. Oh, I
I
was
know
so
it's been a long and tough
stressed.
road, but
Very
you
long
did that.
road.
Like, you did your thesis, you have a job, you did vocationing, you did the podcast, you tried to take care of yourself, tried to do your face, tried to exercise, all of the things. Like, you did a lot, and you should like pat yourself on the back many times.
Many pats. Small claps.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's show. I am coming to you in the spirit of Fergie's, was it the NBA national anthem performance?
Super Bowl, I want to say.
Not Super Bowl.
Not Super
It
Bowl.
was the like basketball, so it was the
Oh,
NBA,
yeah.
and just the abysmal failure of note, like wrong decisions, like someone didn't tell you, girl, you're making a mistake. That's what I feel like just recently.
I'm coming to you as the human embodiment of Fergie's song Big Girls Don't Cry, except it's just someone crying on repeat for 10 hours. Just loud
tears.
crying.
Okay, so now that Fergie has taught us how to fail, or maybe how not to fail,
How to cope with failure, maybe?
has she though? Because she just like disappeared. After that performance,
She living her life. Shakira and J-Lo, what was it at, like, the Grammys?
no, that was the Super Bowl.
Was that the Super Bowl?
And that
was
was
the Super
annoying.
Bowl.
Did you like it?
I loved it.
I unfairly compare anyone to Beyonce, and she did the Super Bowl performance,
So
and no one's
all
been better
future
since.
Super Bowl performances are just meaningless now.
Yeah, like the one that she did by herself, and then the one that she did Formation with the Black Panthers theme, Malcolm X, that whole like
Michael Jackson.
Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
thing, and people were like, "Oh wait, Coldplay were the openers," or it was actually their show. She joined them, but then
No. It was Beyonce's show.
thank you very much. It was the Beyonce show, and there just happened to be a football game
Yeah.
that was happening around it. Failure to me is the simple absence of success. So for most people, that's like a pretty broad meaning, and I think like in social media and in general life, what is quantified as success is very much linked to a material representation of success, of wealth, of happiness. And so for most people, I think that is the definition of failure. I mean, success. So what is your definition of failure?
Failure to me is like being bad at something, which is also like a very subjective standard. Like you could define being bad at something in a lot of different ways, but it sort of ties into your idea of success, or like failure as the absence of success, where it's like you can't show that to other people.
And here's the thing with like showing it to other people, like it's brave. It runs in tandem with how much emotional weight it activates in my psyche. If I fail the ones I love and care about, and also if I fail my own potential. I think those two things are when I feel like a complete failure.
Yeah, those are the heavyweights.
The heavyweights, and I am that emotionally intense person, and that's the space I go to. So because you know, like yourself, you know that of what you're capable of, and like disappointing and failing yourself, for me, it gets me very close, or it like tugs at my depression, like, hey girl, come in, you're
Yeah.
welcome, I'm inviting you in. So
Like, welcome back.
like, welcome back, exactly. So I think that if you try and live your life from the space of as little mendacity as possible, I know that you're honest with yourself and that you didn't do your best. Because when you try your best and you try your hardest and you give all your grit, if you also do fail, it's kind of more like a lesson, and be like, I can give it my all and still fail. But in that process of like pouring yourself into it, you have grown and you've learned. And I think that you could then find some solace knowing that you have tried your best.
Yeah.
Not getting to your potential is a very big knock to my psyche.
That sounds like a good way of distinguishing, though, is like there's a difference between trying your best and being the best.
Oh my
Where
God, yes.
if you try your best and you're still not quote quote the best, like that's still, it builds character, it says something about you or your work ethic or your personality. That doesn't have to be a mark of failure. You just like, hey, someone else was better than you, but that's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing.
Versus if you don't try your best at all, that to me is similar to what you were saying about not fulfilling your potential, where you feel like a bigger failure.
See, something you just said now struck really like powerfully with me, like a mark of failure. And how when you compare yourself to other people, you are setting yourself for failure. Because what's that adage, that old adage that says someone else's success is not your failure?
Exactly.
And so we base our definitions on failure based off of other people's accomplishments.
Yeah, and it's an impossible externally set standard where like there are what, like 6 billion people in the world. There's always going to be someone who is a little bit better than you, if not a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot. Just try and go to Los Angeles and do anything in the realm
Do
of
anything
talent.
at all.
Like there are people with less talent than you do, and they make it farther than you do.
Yeah, and like even if that's not the case, maybe they're genuinely more talented than you, but that doesn't mean that your accomplishments are any less
Yeah.
or that you as a person are any less.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Like failure doesn't mean that you are a failure. It just means you had, I think I like to think of it in a positive way, like this wasn't for you, or try harder.
Yeah.
Or if you're honest with yourself, you didn't really want it bad enough to put in your all.
I think that's like a dangerous kind of slippery slope though, because it sets up people to think that like if only I try more or if only I want it more than everyone else, then I will get the result that I want, where that isn't always the case.
I get a lot of flack for this kind of thinking, and I think it's a great episode starter for something else. But I do have this very strong conviction that if you want something bad enough, you will persevere no matter the failures and stumbles and problems that come along. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that disagree on that
Yeah.
a lot.
Here.
So I think, yeah.
Hello, it me.
A lot of people, that's DJ. But I also know that a lot of people probably get what I'm saying. So that's an interesting thing. I love
Yeah.
like not agreeing with my friends, because what's the point of friendship if you can't learn from each other? So if you're
Right.
just like blowing smoke up each other's ass, then what's the point of a
Yeah.
friendship if you're not growing?
No, and to some extent, I do agree with you, where if you don't want something hard enough, then you're not going to put in the effort that it takes to get that thing. And so it is a good mindset to have, but there are some situations where I think that doesn't apply, where just
Okay.
the reality of like how competitive a certain field is, or like how many other candidates applied for this job, or like
Yeah.
something else is going to be a pretty big factor in whether or not you can accomplish what you want to
Oh, I definitely
outside
agree
of
with
your
that.
own will.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think let's move on to like, how does like failure feel for you, like physically? So for me, failure is like this, definitely this, my stomach sinks, and it's like this sadness mixed with a little bit of fear and it kind of sits on my diaphragm. Like that's the physicality of me. It makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of like when you go through like a really long tunnel and you hear those like echoing like
Ooh,
reverberations and it feels like there's less air around you and you're just kind of like stuck in this dark, like compressed space.
like suffocating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's a very good explanation of, like, I don't know, it reminds me of like the Dementors in
Yeah,
Harry
just like
Potter, where
sucking all
like,
the happiness out of the room.
yeah, and I know that the Dementors are a representation of depression,
Mm-hmm.
and I like those. I like giving feelings, emotions,
Yeah.
depressions like a character, because it helps me look at it and analyze it, just like we are doing with failure now. It's like
Mm-hmm.
give it some form so that you can see it better.
Yeah. So you can see it and then maybe understand it on the first step towards addressing it or
Mm.
like recovering from it.
So, I think we should jump into methods of dealing with failure.
Yeah. So the best advice that I've been given for dealing with failure is this like technique or this kind of mindset of radical acceptance. So this is something I picked up in therapy where it's like you just like lay out all of the facts as they are. Like, oh, this thing sucks. You don't want to do it, but you need it to do in order to do this other thing. And so like that acceptance of the situation that like, oh, this is really bad and like, oh, you really don't want to do this, but you still have to is a way of like easing yourself into like working forwards in that situation where like you don't have to fool yourself that oh this is actually like something that you do want to do in order to do the thing. You can just accept that it's really shitty and still do the thing.
There is a lot to be said for looking at a situation, looking at the facts, and be like, this is what it is.
Yeah.
No matter how much I throw tantrums about it, feel bad about it, be annoyed about it,
Yeah.
this thing still has to get done. Now, I can choose to be a bitch about it, and I don't use that
Mm-hmm.
word lightly, but I can choose to be bitch made about it, or I can choose to do it and get it over with so that I can move on with the things that I want to do.
Yeah, and so seeing like maybe you like some person and you're afraid that if you ask them out, they're going to turn you down. Just like accepting those facts for what they are. Like you could tell this person that you like them and then they could say, "Hey, I don't really like you like that."
So this goes back to like advice I've given before, where every question or every possibility has a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
And when you prepare yourself for how you would feel if it's a no, like if you have an actionable plan for what you will do when it is no, you you make your brain ready for it so that when it happens, and invariably it does,
Sometimes it
within
happens.
like the ebbs and flows of life, things are great sometimes, and for you to be able to appreciate the good, you must experience the opposite of it.
Right.
So experiencing failure is really just a preparation for appreciating the successes that you will have. Like, just because you fail doesn't mean that you will never ever succeed.
Right.
But if you stay in that mindset of like, oh, this is horrible, then it's just gonna stay horrible. Like, I wrote a post about confidence, which you
Mm-hmm.
read, and it's how I had the worst self-esteem because of like childhood things and like trauma and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had embarked on a mission of rejection therapy, and I like detailed this in like the one blog post that I have. um and I like detailed this and how I came to be confident, because someone had said, you're a very confident person, and I had never thought of that in my life. But I started to like look backwards into how did I become this person
Mm-hmm.
despite being very introverted. And it really was getting used to being uncomfortable and getting used to rejection. And rejection and failure are very closely
Yeah.
linked. So I went out, and the purpose was to get rejected.
Mm.
So I'd go to a club alone. Imagine going to a club alone in Korea. It's not a thing you do. talking to people with the point of getting rejected, so that I can get used to, so that my ego can get used to that failure. And you realize, oh, hey, I'm still alive.
And if you don't go out and if you don't make those attempts, accepting that there's a possibility of rejection or of failure, then you also don't leave room for that possibility of success or that possibility of connecting with someone.
After I did that like little experiment with myself, I became I'd go out with friends and they go, you know everyone. I'm like, no, darling, everyone knows me.
Okay, so far we've been talking a lot about like what is failure or how do we think of failure, but I think an easy way to put that, to make that a bit clearer, is to like put it into contrast, like what is not failure. And so this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, is just kind of looking at the quote quote objective outcome of a situation in order to decide like, was this a success or a failure? Like, I got this grade, that means that it was a failure. Or I got this outcome or this performance review, which means it was a success. It was a success. But that's a really, like, that's another external standard that you put on yourself, where maybe it's better to look at failure or success as something like, how did you process this event or this experience?
Oprah says this: turn your wounds into wisdom. Failure
Yes.
is definitely a wound, but there is a space, and that's like a vulnerable space to be in. If you are able, go into that space and look for the positive things, look for the things that you did right.
Right.
And commend yourself for it. Like, use that to then build, like, heal the wound, turn it into wisdom, and you automatically carry that with you, because that's like a scar that's there forever. Like, you remember all the big failures that was your responsibility. You remember all those things, but you can choose to remember the lesson and to do better next time. Because like Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you
Do better.
thank you.
Yes. No, and it's looking at failure as more of like a process, or like it's not one single event that just dictates, oh, I failed or oh, I succeeded. It's looking at it sort of as an experience. So you can initially fail, there's some initial hurt, but you can grow from that and you can take something from that, like a lesson, like you said.
Just try and look at it, like imagine yourself as someone observing the failure and what you did, and be like, okay, what did I do wrong? What did I do right? Choose to focus on the right, to focus on the things that will make you stronger, and take it from there.
Yeah, like you can look at asking someone out and being rejected as, oh, I was rejected and so I failed. But you can also look at it like, oh, I practiced expressing my feelings to someone, or I practiced trying to make a connection with someone else.
That whole rejection thing reminds me of like this. I had gone like part of rejection therapy, and like
Yes.
I talked to this one guy whom I found very attractive, but the point was just to talk to him. And it was great, and I was gonna buy him a drink, and then his prissy, I have to say this, white gay friends, because there's usually white gays are problematic, like just racially problematic. And then basically they prevented our interaction, and all I wanted was to talk to him. I didn't want anything else. And then years later we reconnected, and he had remembered me because he said that I was so confident.
Yeah, and so who knows if a current like failure in the moment, a quote quote failure, might actually like build a bridge for the future.
That's powerful, actually, because like at the time I had like I accepted the situation. I didn't go home and cry about it.
Yeah.
And then 2 or 3 years later we reconnected, and if I didn't talk to him, if I was too shy, if I was too in my feelings, if I was too scared of rejection, this whole process would not have happened.
Yeah, no, and I can remember like not even just like in the dating kind of romance area, just like professionally, I went to a conference where I talked to this other professor, and I was like 1,000% sure that I had made an ass of myself and just like just seemed very ignorant and like unknowledgeable about this topic. And then a couple years later, we worked on a project together.
Wow. And he remembered you.
And he remembered me. He was like, oh, you were that girl.
You see, those are some nice anecdotes for how things really can work out. if you can muster up the courage to look failure in the face and be like, you know what, it's not that bad.
Yeah. If I had dwelled in that space of like embarrassment and like resigning myself to putting this experience down as a failure, then I probably wouldn't have done more work in the meantime to be in a place where I could impress that person later.
So I hope you guys could take away something from that, because really the point of the show is to help people navigate emotions that kind of like bring us down. So thank you everyone for listening, and especially a big shout out to Oki. Thank you for listening, girl. I know you are. Thank you to my sister Clarice, my brother JD. I know at this point it's a lot of family and friends listening. Winsome's mom, dankie tannie. Ek is baie bly dat u luister.
Ooh.
That's Afrikaans. And yeah, thanks everyone for like the feedback. It's a nice thing to know that people can relate to the things we talk about, and that it does help some people like put their emotions in order, I guess, and be able to work through it, like work through stuff.
I love that phrasing, putting your emotions into order, because it makes me think of like categorizing or like cleaning up like a closet space.
Listen,
Like taking out all the gunk and taking out all the stuff you should have thrown away years ago.
what is that Eminem song? Cleaning up my closet. Is it Eminem?
Thank you, June. We know you're a very consistent listener, and like hopefully this is helping you process some stuff as we process our own stuff as well.
Yeah, it's very nice to like see people like send us like video or like comments or stuff. Like we really appreciate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's nice to know we're not just yelling into the void
Yeah.
as we usually do.
And even then, I will keep yelling.
Oh, screaming for life.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Ivor.
I'm DJ.
Bye-bye.
Bye.